Thanks everybody for coming by our celebration today. I assume that everybody's cajoled you already into getting some coffee and everything like that. So feel free to get up in the middle of me speaking to get a refill if you would like, or an apple or an orange. But you probably shouldn't get up in the middle of them talking because they're going to say interesting things. I'll just be asking them questions. So I'm Dan Jaycox. I think I know almost everybody here, but I'm the director of the Excel program. And we're here celebrating first generation college students. I'm a first generation college student. And I'm going to let our three panelists for our first gen professional presentation introduce themselves.
My name is Maddie Pryor, and I work with the Upward Bound program.
My name is Stacy Gillette, and I'm a social science instructor.
My name's Jaden Skaggs, and I'm a navigator.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's first talk a little bit about just the general definition of what a first generation college student is. We have different opinions of it, and there are different definitions of it. So we usually look at it from a standpoint of neither of my parents had a bachelor's degree. For me, my mom went to a couple of years of college and didn't complete. Did any of your parents have college experiences?
So my dad went to a semester at College of the Ozarks, and then decided to join the United States Air Force. And so he and my mom have been together since they were in 8th grade. And my mom was a bit younger, and so she followed him straight to the Air Force and had no college experience at all. She did go on and get her insurance license and became a licensed insurance agent. And then my dad now works in a pipeline company. He's a superintendent of a pipeline company. So neither of them really got the college experience. My brother and I both did. So that's for me.
So for me, I'm one of 5, and I was the first one in my family to go to college. Neither of my grandparents on either side went to college. My parents didn't go to college. And after two of us kids had graduated from college, my mom went back and she got her bachelor's degree from Central Methodist at the age of 53 in special education. And now she's completing her master's in counseling through CMU at age 59, which I really commend her for. So I was the first one in my family as a first-gen student to go to college.
My dad did not go to college. He is very hands-on, so he does diesel mechanic kinds of things. But my mom did go to college. She just has 2 associate's degrees, so she does physical therapy assistant.
Very cool. Now, Jaden, you said was it your older brother? So was that helpful to you at all to have an older sibling? I had an older sibling who went to college, but it wasn't particularly helpful for me. To be honest, we had very different experiences.
Yeah, so my brother and I kind of the same. He's 5 years older than me, and we both played sports in college. And so he only lasted 2 semesters before decided it wasn't right for him. And so he then took several years off and went back and earned his bachelor's and is now a school teacher when he was 28. And so I actually graduated before him and kind of went through all of it before he did. And so our experiences were very different. The age gap, he's a boy, I'm a girl. But I think it was helpful to me in the aspect of he played a sport, and so I kind of knew what to expect on that side, the athletic side, just schedule-wise, balancing it with school. But outside of that, no, I don't really think that it was like super helpful to me, other than he had kind of already been through it. My parents had been through, the FAFSA process. They kind of already had done a little bit of it once. But other than that, it was pretty hard with the gap, I would say.
Yeah, so just to kind of expand on that, what did you guys face, or looking back, what challenges do you think that maybe would have been easier if there had been somebody before you?
So I definitely think if somebody had gone before me, I would have chosen to go to Mac for 2 years before I went to my university. I graduated with my bachelor's and master's from St. Louis University, and my parents were like, either you go to Mac, if you decide to go to another university, you're going to have to figure it out. Because they had no experience, so I was kind of the test dummy for my other siblings and was able to guide them and provide them support. So it was a lot of figuring it out as I went and failing a couple of times and just getting right back up and refusing to quit.
So I was actually in the Upward Bound program when I was in high school. So we help out a lot with that, FAFSA information and all that. So it definitely can be very overwhelming. It's overwhelming for my parents, but the Upward Bound staff was really helpful. So we got that all figured out pretty easily.
Now, Stacy, I know a little bit about you, and I know that you were a dual enrolled high school student. So you took classes at Mac before you started, I guess after graduation you went to SLU. So do you think that the dual enrollment, dual credit process was helpful to you at all in terms of understanding the college world?
I think it was definitely helpful in a sense. The only problem is you would spend a half a day at Mac and then you would go back to high school. I think for a lot of our dually enrolled students, they're really not spending any of their time in high school. They're spending most of their time here at Mac, which I think is beneficial. So I think if I had more time on campus, it would have been more helpful than just the few hours I was on in the mornings.
All right, so we're going to switch gears pretty drastically from that college experience to the workplace experience. That's really what we want to focus on today. So for you guys, could you just tell us, each one of us, tell us what your first professional job was after graduation?
So my first professional job after my master's degree is I was a social worker at Mercy Hospital Jefferson. So I helped facilitate discharge planning for people on a medical surgical unit, and that was quite an experience for me. You had to learn things pretty quickly. As a social worker, you wouldn't typically experience the medical background and education in the medical field. That's not something that we learned in college, so you had to learn very quickly from the doctors and nurses and physical therapists a lot of lingo, a lot of abbreviations, and the way things in the medical world worked.
My first professional job out after my master's was a student records coordinator at Florida State College at Jacksonville in Jacksonville, Florida. So I worked in the registrar's office, not in a student-facing role, but more on like the IT side, graduation, processing things on the back end for transcripts and things like that. So worked in a small group, but still in a college setting in higher education.
This was actually my first professional job. I graduated college in May 2022 and started working here just 2 weeks after I graduated. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I started out as a news director at a radio station right after my undergraduate degree.
No.
Right? Yeah. And in some ways, yes, but it didn't take me too long to realize it wasn't a good fit for me. And I think a lot of it was I did not have reasonable expectations for what that job was going to look like. So do you feel like your first job after you graduated really met your expectations? Did you have a firm grasp of what it was really going to be like?
I think I had a general understanding because as a social worker, you are required to do on-the-job experience before you graduate with your bachelor's and master's degree. So I did my bachelor's level practicum at BJC Hospice here in Farmington, and my master's level practicum I completed at Washington University School of Medicine in the Huntington's Disease Clinic. So I had a diverse experiences from that aspect, which helped prepare me a little bit for what I was going to expect going into the professional world, but there was still a lot of learning to be done on the job.
So I went to College of the Ozarks, and it's very work-oriented. So I was kind of prepared. They prepare you a lot with like interviews and those kinds of things. But when I was like approaching graduation, I didn't really know what job I wanted to do, and then I just found this one, and it kind of worked out perfectly. So yes and no on that.
So I think that I had a better understanding just because when I earned my master's degree, I was coaching volleyball at the university that I was studying at, and they didn't hire assistant coaches, so as a graduate assistant, I still had to do a lot of the work in higher education and working with our student athletes that were on my team. And so I had an idea of what working in higher ed looked like. I think it was a little bit different for me to switch gears from athletics to academics, and to go from a role where I was very involved with my students and my athletes and then into a role that was more on the back end and not student facing. So that was an adjustment for me. Also, being in a new state, my husband joined the military, and so we moved right after I got my master's degree, and that was a little bit of adjustment just because, you know, different state, different rules for education. There was a whole learning curve that I had to go through, and so I think that I knew what to expect as a professional in higher education. I just had some changes and adaptions that needed to be made.
Yeah, so for me, whenever I went back and completed a master's, that program was very much designed to prepare you to be a professional in that area. I think in many ways much more so than my undergrad degree was. So I think that was really valuable for me. So what kind of things during your first year in work do you wish you had known ahead of time?
I think a couple of the things that I wish I knew ahead of time that I don't think my parents could have taught me if they had gone to college, I just think it's part of the learning curve, is that there's so much you don't know, and it's okay not to know things right off the bat. It is okay to do things wrong. It's okay to get that corrective feedback, and it's okay not to know everything within that first 30 to 60 days on the job, even when there's a lot of pressure to perform.
Yeah, a lot of things, I was just fresh out of college, so I didn't really know. A lot of things was just insurance and all those kinds of things. I'd always been on my parents, and they were like, here's all these insurance papers, and I had no idea what they meant, so it was all those kinds of things. Then also just like free time, you'll have a lot of free time. You don't have to go home and worry about studying for things. You just kind of get to figure out more hobbies and things you like to do.
I would say mine's definitely kind of along the lines of what she said, just like the HR stuff that, you know, I think you're prepared in the workplace for the specific job, but maybe not the parts of somebody else's job, or if you didn't go for HR or you haven't had to deal with a lot of that stuff. I think that was a transition for me as well.
Yeah, I think it's always good advice, to ask 7,000 questions in the first 60 or 90 days, because it's completely reasonable for you to not know. And if you don't ask them, then there'll come a time where you'll be mortified to ask that question, or it'll become very evident that you don't know something very critical. I didn't know how many dependents should I put? What should my tax withholding be? You know, I mean, those kinds of things. But you figure it all out, right? So, excellent. So what was the most important thing that you learned outside of the classroom during your college experience that translated to work?
I would say just discipline and responsibility. I think for me specifically, juggling a pretty rigorous schedule and being able to stay organized and knowing my time management and the responsibilities that I had, and kind of just starting out being on my own, and that responsibility was something that translated for me, especially in a role that I'm in now. It's very important to be organized, especially at peak times, and so I think that is what I've taken with me, is just being disciplined, knowing what I'm capable of and what I need to do for myself, and staying organized and managing my time.
I think as a social worker, having a unique experience where our field is guided by a code of ethics, where we have ethics related to our colleagues, to our clients, and to the profession as a whole. One of the most important things that I learned is if I put people first and I put that ethic of treating other people with dignity and respect and focusing on that prior to everything else, that I typically did not go wrong.
The thing I learned is socialization, talking to different people and how to talk to them, because not everyone comes from the same background, and at college you get to meet a lot of different people, and that just helps with my job today. Not all the kids are the same, so it's easy to know how to talk to different kinds of students.
Excellent. So I mentioned the ask all those questions early. What other kind of pieces of advice do you have for somebody transitioning into a professional role?
I would just say don't get overwhelmed, which is easier said than done, but just take deep breaths, and it's just go along with the process. Don't try and get everything done immediately. It's all going to work out, and just also utilize your resources, because there's lots of people that you can ask that can help you along the way.
The best advice I've ever received, because I've worked in many different fields since I graduated with my master's degree, is do not ever take a job somewhere that does not offer 4 to 6 weeks of training.
So I think my biggest piece of advice is just you're not alone. There's been somebody else in the same shoes that you've been in, and so be willing to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to, and also don't be afraid to make a change. So I think we all learn a lot about ourselves, especially in your first role. Like, I learned that I did want to be around people, and so sitting in my office and doing, graduations and stuff on the back end was great, but I did miss the interactions that I had with students, and so learning that about myself and being able to say, hey, maybe this isn't the best fit for me, and transitioning into a student-facing role. Just trust yourself, I guess.
Stacy, you mentioned the 4 to 6 weeks of training, and that really stands out to me in a lot of ways. Do you guys feel as though businesses, organizations are recognizing the first generation professional and providing support specifically with that in mind? What are some things employers can do a better job of, you think, in terms of helping first generation professionals?
So I think where I was at previously, I think first generation professionals have come a long way. Like, we are starting to recognize it, and we are putting more emphasis on it. In my first role, I don't really feel like I had maybe what I would have hoped for as a first generation professional. But I do feel like there were resources if I had to ask. I just don't think that I was in a position where I felt like I necessarily knew who to ask. I think that the mentorship that we do here is something that is really great, and something that maybe we could tie into if it is a first generation professional, having a mentor that was also a first generation professional, just because there is a difference there, and there are some questions like you may be worried about asking, even though, yes, this person is your mentor, but they might not have experienced the same thing. But the mentorship is something that was really helpful to me. I know even transitioning, I've been at different universities, but transitioning here specifically, that was something that helped me a lot, and gave me somebody that I could kind of always go to, and I knew that she would be willing to help because she signed up to do it and was very willing to teach me and answer the questions that I had. So I think that maybe if businesses and professional jobs would do something along those lines and think about pairing up first generation employees, that would be a good idea.
I think one of the most interesting experiences that I had at an employer, which was also pretty supportive and not necessarily catered to the first gen professional, but catered to understanding how we're all different, is we all took personality tests, and you were labeled as a certain color. And those colors identified ways that you communicate best, and ways that might be off-putting for other people that are not meant to be that way. So they really focused on teaching us how to work with and how to communicate with people from different backgrounds in different ways, which I was never taught anywhere else. So I feel like that was pretty important, and probably one of the best experiences that I had with an employer.
What I would say is, just when you're looking at hiring people, maybe not look at just their experience, because a lot of jobs are like, oh, you need 5 or 10 years of experience, but you're not going to get 5 to 10 years experience if you just graduated and looking for jobs. So I think it's important to just pay attention in like interviews and see how the person acts and those kinds of things, and not just look solely on their background and job experience.
Excellent. Well, at this point, do you guys have any questions for our group of people up here? No questions? Carter, you always have a good question. I waited until you took a bite of that apple.
So, I guess, let me see.
Take your time. You can chew on the apple for a minute if you want.
Just gonna chew on it for a second.
Yeah, chew on it for a second. If you don't actually have a question, you don't have to ask one.
Now the pressure's on.
Yeah. Was there anything else you guys would like to share?
Do you think you'll encourage your kids to go to school now that you were a first generation student?
Yeah, I think so. It's just, but not every kid is meant for college, so it just depends on their likes and interests and those kinds of things.
So I somewhat twisted my husband's hand behind his back and forced him to enroll in MAC. He dropped out of college when he was 19 and now is coming back 20 years later because he can go for free. And he's actually very much enjoyed it and enjoyed learning about things that he didn't realize was out there because he's worked in construction most of his life. So I think with my daughter, it'll be the same where I'll encourage her to, but there are so many different options out there for kids who don't like college or feel like that's not a good fit upon graduation.
Sort of similar to Stacy, my daughter's only 2, so it's hard to know what she's going to want to do. But I think that my husband and I both graduated, and will encourage her to get an education. But there are many different ways in which they can do that. So
So I've got a 7th grader who has already picked his college out. I didn't really encourage or discourage it. My 4th grader, I'm less sure about. I don't know. We'll see. I'll obviously encourage her to do whatever she wants to do. I mean, because that's who I am. My wife will tell her to go to college. So.
Okay.
What
so,
you got, Carter?
So after you completed your time at a 4-year, what every option for all of you, what made you choose MAC than say compared to a bigger school such as North NC East State, something like that? What made you choose MAC over NC State or any other bigger college than a 4-year?
Are you talking about to go to or to work at?
Work at.
Okay.
So for me, I enjoyed my time in higher education, and I, like I mentioned, had moved all over with the military, and so transitioning back to Missouri, I actually started out at Missouri Baptist, but I had just had a baby 1 month prior to starting there, and so traveling, we wanted to be close to home because we missed out on being home for 4 or 5 years, and so having a kid and wanting to be close to family, it made sense because I graduated from Farmington, so our families are still here, and then MAC just was one closer to where I was at, and then gave me the opportunity to be in a student-facing role and go back to where I thought that I kind of wanted to be.
And similar to Jaden, this has always been home for me. I'm a graduate of Central High School, so I'm from the area. I grew up in the area. I have a very strong attachment to this area. So when the job opening posted at MAC, it was kind of a no-brainer to come back here.
Yeah, I'm from here also. I graduated from North County, and I went to college, and it was in Branson. It was kind of like the big city, and I didn't really want to stay around there, so I was just planning on coming home and just kind of seeing what jobs were around, and this one was open, so I applied for it.
Yeah, Carter, I grew up 30 minutes away from here, and I knew this was a place where the students, they need the employees here, right? And I think that's important, to feel needed and feel like you're doing something that matters. So it made a lot of sense to come back close to home. Great question, Carter. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? We really appreciate you guys attending this little panel presentation, and we really appreciate you guys participating in it. Thanks so much.